No, and now they're giving him full keys to the car. They got rid of all of their older guy veterans, especially now getting rid of Christian Wood. This is Jaylen Green's team now, fully. So we're gonna have to wait and see how this goes. Hello and welcome to the Sunday, September 18th edition of the TV on Basketball podcast with your host, TV. Hope you're having a fantastic day and thank you for clicking on to watch or listen to today's episode. Before we start, I do have to plug my other platforms. Remember to follow at TV on Basketball on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for updates on the podcast and for other great content. If you're on YouTube, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Plus, hit the notification bell so you know when I release any videos. And for my podcast listeners, remember to subscribe and leave a review if you're on Apple. And for Spotify, Anchor, or Podbean listeners, just show your support in any way possible. I'd see you guys. I definitely highly appreciate it. Now we're going to be going into part 2 of my NBA season preview. Last week we went to the Northwest and Atlantic divisions. This week we're going Central and we're also going Southwest. So part 2 of the season preview series, different from what I did last year for sure. You know, going through the standings and seeing my predictions on the standings and stuff. This year, a little bit different. Again, I'm just going to be going through each of these teams, talking about what would be a successful season for them, what would be a failure of a season for them. We're going to go through all of that, and it's going to be a really, really good episode. Last week, I went about 40 minutes, so expect another type of episode like that. And if you missed out your other team, it's either I post on my last video, or it's going to be in next week's, which is the final part 3. I wouldn't even say final season preview because I'm still going to be going through awards and all that stuff in a later episode. So again, be on the lookout for that. Thank you guys for all your support. But without further ado, let's get into this because, man, there's a lot of teams we got to talk about here. Last week, already a banger. I do believe it's a banger. We're talking about the Atlantic division, which is going to be highly, highly competitive this year. And now we're going to be talking about some teams, man, especially a lot of young teams here, who are looking to take the next step in their rebuilding, or even if they're already in the playoffs, they're ready to take that next step. But we're going to talk about first, honestly, the only team here that I believe, there's maybe 2 teams here that are kind of filled with veterans or stuff like that, maybe 3. The rest are a bunch of just young teams, and I think we're going to start off in the Central Division, and let's talk about the Chicago Bulls. And man, the Chicago Bulls last season was a very up and down season for them, very much a roller coaster. They were the top 3 seed in the East for the majority of the season, along kind of like with the Cavaliers, which we're gonna go into a bit later. How they were kind of in a guaranteed playoff spot position for sure, but even in the upper half of the Eastern Conference playoff picture. But injuries really derailed their season, especially to Lonzo Ball. And this season, for me, what would make it a successful season would be making the second round a failure, missing out on the playoffs entirely. Now, for Bulls fans, I do have a few worries. One of them being Lonzo Ball again. The injury kept him out for the remainder of the season last year, and you know what? And a lot of people are probably thinking, look, he's going to miss out, but at least he'll be ready for the start of next season. Unfortunately for Bulls fans, it may not be 100% possibility. There were reports early on saying that he might not be ready for the start of the season, which gives an indication that the injury is much worse than we expected. But as a team, with the team as a whole, even just imagining it with a healthy Lonzo Ball, this team was built to make the playoffs and potentially even further with the trade for Zach LaVine, the trade made for DeMar DeRozan, signing Lonzo Ball to a long-term contract, and then this past offseason, making sure Zach LaVine is locked up for the next 5 years. This team is showing that they want to make a run, and they intend to make a run further than what they did last year. Hopefully, Lonzo Ball is healthy, even hopefully earlier on in the season, so they can have him for a good chunk of it. But their intentions have been made clear. And like I've mentioned with a lot of other East teams, they just have gone better when looking at teams like the Cavs, the teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Atlanta Hawks, and then you still have the beastly teams in the East that you just know are going to be at the top always. And for the Bulls, you just don't know where to situate them. which is gonna be like the big question here this season. I do believe also for the Bulls that their depth is kind of questionable. I mean, they have a really good starting five, and seeing someone like DeMar DeRozan still at this age performing at a very high level is great. I mean, they brought in Goran Dragic. They're going to expect better production from Ayo Dosunmu this year. You know, what's going to happen with Kobe White. Their front court depth is kind of weak, but they did bring in Andre Drummond, which is going to be a nice piece for them off the bench. But there's still some question marks there. And how are they going to compete for the rest of with the rest of the East? I'm not sure, but I do believe that this team will still make the playoffs. I really do. Where they finish, how far they can make it, we're not sure. But if we could see a more consistent Chicago Bulls, like first half Chicago Bulls last year, I think they are at 1 point a first seed in the East. If they can find more consistency and like just still kind of maintain a solid defense, I mean like they had before the Lonzo injury, I think they'll be good. But there's still a lot of question marks, especially around the defensive end. But a healthy offseason for Zach LaVine, we expect him to be at an All-NBA level once again this season. With a DeMar DeRozan who could play an All-Star level, same thing with Vucevic, and hopefully Lonzo Ball come back healthy once again. You mix in all those factors, you can expect to see a good season from the Chicago Bulls. But what's crazy about the East is that is not a guarantee. Like I mentioned last week, there were going to be like one or two teams very disappointed on the result that they had this season. And honestly, the Bulls can be one of them. They really could. But there really isn't much room for them to make improvements. They have like a core that's set there, mostly playing for the right now. They have a few younger guys, of course, with Lonzo and LaVine. But DeMar and Vucevic, they're in the latter half of their careers. They'll still produce for you. I think Vucevic can get back to, an 18-11 level. I expect DeMar to still average around 23 to 25 points per game this year. I do think they'll still produce. But the defensive end and kind of how they compete with the rest of the East is going to be the big question. And the Bulls, if they do miss the playoffs, it's going to be an absolute, like it's not going to be a good season for them whatsoever. If they can make the second round, I think that would be a success. Honestly, I think maybe that's a bit even too much to ask. If they can make the playoffs, that'd be great. But at the same time, you don't want to be building a team like this and saying, you know what, we're satisfied with a first round exit. They're not. And I think for them, they expect to make the second round, potentially make a Cinderella type run to the conference finals or the NBA finals. Do I see that happening? No, but I think that would be a successful season for them. But like I said, they could miss the playoffs, and that could be not a good look. Not a good look for 100%. Going back to another team in the East, which has a lot of expectations coming into this year, the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks coming into the season, basically the same roster as their normal selves. They still got the Giannis. They still have Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton. Their big three is still intact. Of course, they have Bobby Portis, who they re-signed to a new contract. Brook Lopez still on the team, and they still have decent depth in my opinion. In people such as George Hill, Grayson Allen, Javon Carter, Pat Connaughton. They basically have the same sort of like core 9 or 10 guys that they had from their championship year, and I think that they're looking for another run like that. Last season, it was unfortunate for them because Milton legitimately just got injured right before the second round. And look, they put up a good fight against the Boston Celtics 100%. They took it to a Game 7, but they ultimately did lose in honestly convincing fashion last year. I mean, that Game 7 was ugly. But the Milwaukee Bucks, when you have the best player in the league in Giannis Antetokounmpo, you still have, your two co-stars there in Jrue Holiday and Chris Middleton. You're expected to go far. For me, a success for them is making it to the conference finals and putting up a good fight. The only reason I say that would be a successful season for them, some people might say the NBA finals, potentially an NBA championship, it's championship or bust, but it really isn't. You have these guys locked up for a long time. Giannis is still 27 years of age. As long as you can keep yourself in the mix, and look, I'm not saying that that's where I see them finishing the conference finals. Honestly, they can win the championship for all I know. But making it to the conference finals still solidifies you as one of the best teams in the East. And you're going to get the best out of Giannis. You know that this team has the capability to because of the camaraderie they have together. This is the type of things you should expect year in and year out from your organization if you're the Milwaukee Bucks. But in terms of failure, a second round exit for sure would be another failure. I'll preface this by this, a healthy second round exit. Because there was clearly, again, excuse is not like the right word for this, but when you take out the second best player from a team, what do you really expect? They still almost took down the Celtics for sure. But having Middleton in that series would have changed a whole lot of things. But so if there's a healthy second round exit, I would consider that a failure of a series just because you have the best player in the league. We've seen this team go farther with this core. That would be a failure. But if they can keep themselves in the mix, the conference finals, even if it's a conference finals exit, I still think it would be a good season for them just because they have some years to work this out. But once again, it's another year for the Milwaukee Bucks. They're one of the top teams in the East. They're the number one, number two in terms of tiers. You could put them up there with the Boston Celtics. They need to be competing for a championship every year. And whether that means making the finals or not, they still got to be in the mix for one of the top teams in the East. As long as they're healthy, we know what Giannis is going to produce, MVP level numbers. We know that Middleton's going to play at an all-star level. We know Jrue Holiday is one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. And they have a good bench around them. They have good supporting pieces who know what their role is and know how to fit within the system because they have been there for a while. As long as they can do that, they can become one of the top teams in the East. And I do believe that they're going to make another long run to the conference finals, potentially even the NBA finals. I do believe that the Bucks are going to be one of those teams to beat. Even with the growing East, you still got to think of the Bucks as one of the clear-on favorites to win it. Let's move on to the next team here, and we're going to be talking about probably the most uninteresting team in this division, the Indiana Pacers. And I'm going to be straight up with it. For me, a successful season is them getting a top 5 pick. And a failure for them, I wouldn't really consider like a failure going one way or another. Actually, you know what? If they're kind of just dead in the center, maybe getting like the 7th, 8th pick. Actually, not even that really. I would just say like there was really like no failure, mostly because there's no expectations. I do believe that they're going to be one of the worst teams in the East, so a top 5 pick is very much realistic. And what's really going to help that is potentially trading Buddy Hield, potentially trading Miles Turner, and just go full-on rebuild, build around the core that you have right now with Benedict Mathurin, with Tyrese Halliburton. Those are the guys that you should really be like, okay, this is our next era of the team. You have those two guys already. You have players like a Terry Taylor, a Chris Duarte, Isaiah Jackson. These are all young players that you want to be building around. Jalen Smith as well. These are the players that you want to be having your main focus on. So for me, even if they have an okay season, I would prefer them to be a top 5, to be in the bottom 5, trying to get that top 5 pick. That would be ideal. But as long as Tyrese Halliburton has a full season as a number 1 option, you can see what he could do. You could see the promise in the Benedict Mathurin. I think that would be a successful season. Really, just like any rebuilding team, you got to look at the roster you have right now and analyze who you want as a long-term piece while still being in a position where you have a good chance at the odds of trying to get the number 1 pick, trying to go for the race for Victor Wembanyama, potentially even adding a Scoot Henderson to the lineup, who knows, for next season. So the Pacers, it's going to be a team that no one's really going to watch. If I do see them on TV, I'm not going to turn it away for sure. I like watching Tyrese Halliburton. I think he's like one of the most exciting young players in this league. But I'm excited to see how he's going to do as a number 1 option. But for the Pacers, really their main goal is to really go full rebuild, try and find a way to get Turner and Hield off the team, and then just commit to that young core and see what they're able to do. Because people like Hield and Turner really don't fit the timeline, and I think that they can really be potential difference makers on teams who are aspiring for the playoffs or even contenders who are looking for that final piece. So yeah, for the Pacers, if they're one of the worst teams in the East, I think that's still really good, just trying to get a top 5 pick to add to that young core. But if they go one way or another, I don't think the organization is going to deem this a failure or a success. Mostly because, you know, they put it out last year as well that they want to be competing year in, year out. Even I don't think that's a realistic thing to go for. The Pacers, even maybe without even trying, they're not like a great team whatsoever. So as long as they can either get a top 5 pick or just like show promise in the young guys, I think it's a good season nonetheless. We're going to be talking about another young team over here, and we're going to be talking about the Detroit Pistons. Now, for me, the Pistons have been in the rebuilding phase for a while now. They've been able to draft players like Cade Cunningham just this past offseason, picking up a Jaden Ivey. And even in previous years, bringing in Isaiah Stewart, Sadiq Bey, Killian Hayes. There's some other guys on that team, Saban Lee, and also training for Marvin Bagley. I think they have a nice young core over there that they want to move forward with. And now that they made also moves in the off seasons to bring in a Nerlens Noel and an Alec Burks, they suggest this year that they want to be more than a bottom feeding team in the East. And for me, a successful season for them is potentially making the play-in, but really just being in the race for the play-in. I think if you can get the next step jump from a Cade Cunningham, a Saddiq Bey, even seeing some promise in Jaden Ivey in that starting lineup, Marvin Bagley in the frontcourt position, as long as they're getting better and they're not a pushover team in the East, I think this is a positive season for them. Because let's be honest, they are a very, very young team. This team, I think, probably if you look at just like average ages, they have to be near the bottom of the league in terms of like average ages, just looking up and down this roster, especially their young core. But unlike other years of the Pistons, they actually added some veterans this year, and like I said, Noel and Burks. They want to kind of develop that winning mentality now. You have a win-now coach in Dwayne Casey as well, who they signed to a contract extension, so you know that the team believes in him and they believe that he can get the best out of this young core. When you have all those factors coming in, sure, you still might be a lottery team, especially because of how deep the East is, but you want to be competitive. You got to not be, chasing the number one pick year in, year out. I mean, this draft, in general, you already got your next center in Jalen Duren, and you already got another backcourt made with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. You're already having that young core. It's time to now focus on them and stop focusing on the exterior stuff. And you got to work to develop them even further, kind of develop that winning mentality. So bringing in players like a Noel and Burks is really going to be a huge plus for them. Do I think they're going to make the play-in? Potentially, honestly, if Cade Cunningham can take the next step and honestly become, I'm not going to say an all-star, but reach near all-star levels, that could actually be a real possibility. But they just have to be competitive. They really do. They've been kind of a bottom seller team for a long time. And now that you've done the work to try and get this young core together, it's now try to develop them and see that who they want to keep long-term, who they want to kind of ship off and maybe like get other assets or even like older players to add to a bit further down the line. I'm excited to see this team. I think this is going to be one of the teams that a lot of people are going to be just super fun to watch, especially if you pre-ordered the 2K23 Ultimate Edition. You're going to be able to get that League Pass, the NBA League Pass. Honestly, in my free time, I'm going to try my best to see some Pistons basketball because I do believe they're going to be a fun watch. One of the teams I'm definitely going to be focusing on in League Pass. I'm just excited to see how they're going to grow this year, and I think just growth in general would be great. They just have to start to learn how to compete, and I think that they will be able to do that this season. Final team in the East I do want to talk about is and then we're going to be talking about the final team in the Central Division. Let's talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers. The reason I kept them last is because, man, I've been talking about them a lot these last couple of weeks, especially after that Donovan Mitchell trade. But for me this season, a successful season for them. I'm not going to go overboard. Just make the playoffs. Make the playoffs for sure. Unfortunately for them, kind of like the Chicago Bulls last year, they had a safe playoff spot for a long time, but man, the injury bug just hit them hard. When you had players like Darius Garland missing significant time, Evan Mobley missing significant time, Jared Allen missing significant time, those are your three best players, and they missed all significant time near the end of the season, which bumped them all the way down to the 7th seed, which forced them to play in the play-in, and man, they just were unlucky. They had to face the Nets, and then they ended up losing the second play-in game as well. So, look, highly unfortunate situation for them, but they saw that the future was bright for them. They saw that they had a special team with them, so they decided to accelerate the rebuild and trade. Honestly, not too many people from your core. I mean, you traded Markkanen, you traded Sexton, you traded Ochai Agbaji, but you brought in a legitimate star player here in Donovan Mitchell, which takes this team from here all the way to here, because you just know that Donovan Mitchell is going to be as a perennial all-star. He's going to give you the 25 to 27 points per game, and he's there to help the team who struggled a lot offensively, especially if you've seen the play-in tournament games. He's going to help that a lot, just finding someone besides Darius Garland to help create their own shot. And like I mentioned before, even though the backcourt defense is going to be hella suspect, they got one of the best frontcourt defensive pairings in the league. So that definitely should be helpful for them. But yeah, I mean, you're probably thinking, why is the bar still so low? I mean, with this team, shouldn't they making it to the second round now, especially adding Donovan Mitchell instead of Colin Sexton? That is a massive, massive upgrade. Yes, but this is still a very young team still. And there are so many great teams in the East who have a lot more sense of urgency than the Cavs have. I mean, let's be honest, they're still going to be competing. They're going to compete no matter what. But there's teams, like I mentioned the Bulls earlier. You got the Bucks earlier that I talked about, the 76ers, the Miami Heat. These teams are kind of built more for the now, built to win more playoff games now than a team like the Cavs, who are still very young. Yes, they still have like fantastic players, 4 potential All-Stars in my opinion, but it's just a different situation for them. And I do believe that making the playoffs just to get these guys exposure, whether it's Garland, Mobley, and Jared Allen in their very young careers, I think that'll be positive for them. And now they got themselves a playoff performer in Donovan Mitchell. I mean, besides last year, we already know that he can perform well in high pressure, highly meaningful games. So once you have that there, then you still have a solid, bench unit with a Karis LeVert. You still got supporting players like Okoro, Ricky Rubio, Kevin Love, etc., etc. You should be making the playoffs. This move was meant to say, you know what? We should have made the playoffs last year. We're going to guarantee that this year. Is it a guarantee? I don't know. But man, this Cavs team is looking really nice, and they really want to take the next step. They really are making the pieces too. Whether that happens or not, we're going to have to wait and see. But again, one of those teams where I'm going to be like, yeah, I want to watch them. And it's going to be nice because it's in the East Coast. Very nice game times for me. Real excited to see what the Cavs are going to be able to do. Now let's move on to the Southwest Division in the NBA. We're moving over to the West. And again, another division where honestly there is a lot of young teams here besides one. But again, that one team who's significantly older than the rest of them, they have one of the best young talents in the league. So we're going to talk about them in this segment. Let's start off with that older team, actually. Let's start off with the Dallas Mavericks. And just plain and simple, their expectations are already high because they have Luka Doncic. When you have Luka Doncic on your team, I don't care if he's 22, 23, 24 years old. I don't care how young he is. You need to make the most out of every single season you have in him. This is a generational level player who, in the next 1 or 2 years, could very well be the number one player in basketball. So you have to take advantage of this opportunity that you have, this gift that you have in Luka Doncic. And funnily this year compared to other years, there's always that discussion that Luka came into training camp unhealthy. He doesn't look in shape and he has to play his way into the season. Kind of like how Nikola Jokic did last year as well. But this year it's different. Luka Doncic, I think, made it all the way to either the quarters or the semifinals of Eurobasket with Team Slovenia. The NBA season starts in what? A month from now? This is going to be the best in-game shape that Luka has been because he has been playing basketball for his national team throughout the entire summer. So you have expectations there. And the players around him, it's not like you have like a young core that you're trying to develop or that. No. You have Reggie Bullocks on your team. You have a Spencer Dinwiddie, Tim Hardaway Jr. And even looking at the forwards, a Dorian Finney-Smith, Max Kleber, who you signed to an extension this past week, Dwight Powell making a trade for Christian Wood. These are players that they have on their team that they're going to be like, we want them to be better, of course, than their previous year. But this is not a rebuild. This is not like something where we can like try and take our time with. No. This is the moves that we make that we think that it's going to be perfect for Luka Doncic, and that these players are going to help us towards our goal of making the NBA Finals. And last year, they surprised a lot of people, making it all the way to the Western Conference Finals, even forcing defeating the Suns in 7 games, absolutely dominant Game 7 there as well, and then losing to the Warriors in 5, who became the eventual champions. Now that we know that they could break the first round curse, this year I expect the very least a second round team in the Dallas Mavericks. We finally saw them break that last year when they faced the Utah Jazz. Now that should be the baseline, second round and more, just so you can get the best out of this team and you can have Luka play in these tight pressure moments. And for me, a failure would be a first round exit. You made it all the way to the conference finals last year. Yes, some of the teams in the West are getting better, whether it's the Lakers, whether it's the Clippers getting all their players back. But you still got to be better than a first round exit, especially having someone of a caliber of Luka Doncic on your team, having that generational talent. They, in my opinion, they have an underrated defense. I still think they're going to be in the top half of the league. And like I mentioned with the Milwaukee Bucks, a lot of these players have been with the Mavs for quite a while now in terms of Finney Smith, Dwight Powell, Kleber, the Tim Hardaway Juniors of the world, the Spencer Dinwiddie who finished the last year's season with them, Reggie Bullock who was with them a couple years. You have a lot of players returning, and they know the system. You know that Luka knows the system. Now it's time to get the most out of it. So if I'm the Dallas Mavericks, if it's not the second round, I would consider that a disappointing season 100%. I'm excited to watch them this year and see how they're going to be able to grow, if Luka is going to be able to finally have that breakthrough MVP moment. I'm not sure. He's going to be in the mix for sure, but we're going to see how well the Dallas Mavericks come out firstly in the first few months of the season. If they can but also if they can maintain it and have a good playoff spot without even being in the play-in tournament. They don't need to be a part of that. Let's see if they're going to be able to repeat the success of last year. Now let's move on to the next team in the Southwest Division. And let's be honest, this team doesn't need to be talked about too much. Let's talk about the San Antonio Spurs. Plain and simple, in my opinion, looking at the up and down this roster, they are the worst team in basketball. Yes, in my opinion, this is the worst team in basketball. No shade at Keldon Johnson. I think he's a solid player, but he should nowhere be a number one option on a team. And they traded away basically all their veterans. They're going completely young now. So, plain simple, if they don't get a top 2 pick, I just think it's a disappointing season. I think that their intentions have been made clear. They want Victor Wembanyama. They really do. And they gutted their team to be in this position where it's just the young guys. You can try and go and develop them. But you're also in a position where none of these guys are really true number one options. Like, I'm looking up and down here. I don't know who's going to be the leading scorer by the end of this year. Some might just say Keldon Johnson, but who knows? You give Josh Primo the minutes, he might explode. Like, what's going to happen with players like Malachi Branham? Like, there's so many guys here that, especially with the rookies and, like, second-year players, there's so many question marks with them. They're either going to not play as well as we think they are, or they're going to completely, like, exceed expectations. So, this team is just really weird to look at. Again, one of the worst teams in the league. In my opinion, the worst team in the league. If they get anywhere outside the top 3 picks in the draft, I think that's just a horrible result for them, because they are looking for that next star to carry them for the next 15 to 20 years, kind of like how they got Tim Duncan in that one draft. They're just waiting for it. They're just waiting up for it. If they can get Victor, that is a massive W. But we're going to have to wait and see. I just don't think this team is going to be fun to watch. I'm not going to be very much interested until basically the draft lottery to see where they're going to end up going. But, yeah, a successful season for them. Just get a top 2 pick. If it's outside the top 3, was the tanking even worth it? I don't know. I know they're looking for Victor. Is there anything else in this? I mean, I don't know this draft class very well, but is there like another superstar type that can really turn around your franchise? I'm not sure, because Victor looks like a generational talent. So, who knows? But the Spurs, man, there's not going to be a lot of talk about them 100%. Next team I want to discuss is the Houston Rockets. And again, with the San Antonio Spurs, I do not have much expectations for this team. But in terms of success and failure, I think it really just revolves around Jaylen Green. Because yes, they have some good young players around the team, with an Alperen Sengun hopefully getting minutes at starting center this year. You have Jabari Smith, who was the 3rd overall pick. You have Kevin Porter Jr. at the point guard position. Jayshawn Tate, Ty Washington, Usman Garuba. It's just a bunch of young players on this team. But what this season is really predicated on is seeing whether Jaylen Green can take that jump and legitimately look like a number 1 or 2 option for this Rockets team down the line, or if he's going to plateau. Yes, I don't see it happening just because he's going to have all of the opportunities in the world to play at a high level and to produce a lot of buckets. But who knows? Who really does know? And now they're giving him full keys to the car. They got rid of all of their older guy veterans, especially now we're getting rid of Christian Wood. This is Jaylen Green's team now, fully. So we're going to have to wait and see how this goes. I think that the Rockets, whether they get a high pick, even though they probably do want the high pick, or not, as long as Jaylen Green takes that next step in his leadership qualities and his scoring ability and just being able to lead this team, I think that's all they really want to see. They drafted him with the second overall pick. He showed out a lot at the end of last year, so hopefully that carries over to this season. As long as he's playing well, he's playing at a high level, and you feel confident in that number 2 selection, I think it's really good for them. It really is, because I think there's a lot of pressure going around him because, man, 1, 3, and 4 already have kind of established themselves in the league. We still have to see more from Cade Cunningham, but, man, Evan Mobley, you're going to be like, you know what, I've seen it. A lot of people are like, I've seen enough. This guy's going to be an all-defensive player for years. This guy's going to be a multiple-time All-Star, perennial All-Star. He's going to be a generational talent. We've seen Scotty Barnes already take that next step, helping a playoff-ready Raptor team go to 6 games with the Philadelphia 76ers. And also Cade Cunningham. I mean, I think, in my opinion, he showed more than Jaylen Green in his last season. Let's see if Jaylen Green can really solidify himself and be like, you know what, this second pick was worth it. I could see you being the leader of our team. I think that's what they really ultimately want to see. Everything else is just kind of extra. If they can be somehow in the play-in mix, I think the Rockets will be like, you know what, we're happy with that. I think that just kind of gives them reassurance that Jaylen Green could be the number 1 guy. But if he plays well and there's still a bottom 2, bottom 3 seed, I think they're gonna be like, you know what, Scoot Henderson. If we can somehow get Victor Wembanyama, that's just another amazing young piece that you can add to this team going forward. So as long as Jaylen Green plays well and has a jump in his game, he takes that next step in his game, I think the Rockets will consider that a successful season. If he plateaus, then there might be a little bit of worry. But again, he's still super young. Just give him time. Next team I want to talk about is the Memphis Grizzlies. Actually, the Memphis Grizzlies? Yeah, let's talk about the Memphis Grizzlies. Last season, one of the most surprising teams, I believe, finishing the season 56-26, the second best record in the league. And a big reason for that was the absolute emergence of Ja Morant. Just ridiculous numbers last year. Won the Most Improved Player award, which I called last season, and he fulfilled that. He fulfilled that kind of prediction that I had. But yeah, they were the number 2 seed, 56-26. A successful season for me is them repeating that sort of a success, or even going further. It's still a super young team. You legitimately have a core of Dillon Brooks, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant. You could even throw guys like a Brandon Clark and Zaire Williams in there as well, Xavier Tillman. All these guys were there last year, and more than likely they were there the year before. I mean, even Steven Adams is on this roster as well, but he's one of the older veterans, along with Danny Green, who's probably going to be just supporting from the bench. This team, you just expect them to take the next step. You don't think they're just going to plateau over here. You expect more from Jaren Jackson Jr., who had a very good season last year after having a bad injury the year prior. You see John Morant in the top 5 point guards in the league discussion, so you hope to see him produce at another high level this year. It's just a super young team, and you just don't want to see regression, I think, for this season. Actually, even if I said second round exit is still considered a success, I wouldn't be mad if they got eliminated in the first round, but they lost to a team like the Denver Nuggets. If they lost to a team like the Los Angeles Clippers, like the Phoenix Suns, the Dallas Mavericks, Golden State Warriors, I can go on and on just because the West is that deep. But the Memphis Grizzlies just have to stay competitive, especially in the playoffs. If they can make the second round, again, that would be great. But if they can go to a 6-7 game like a slugfest with any of the top teams in the West, I think I could still consider that a second successful season. They have a bunch of young players on their team, like I mentioned earlier, and they're just fun to watch. They have a good coach there in Taylor Jenkins as well. This is just a very well-run organization. So once you start getting that reputation, especially making the playoffs a year prior, when a lot of people didn't expect them to even beat the Golden State Warriors in 2021. So you have those expectations now. You just kind of have to meet them. Even though you're such a young team, you're kind of on another level than a lot of these young teams. You've proven that you can make it far already. And you went to, I think it was 6 games or 5 games with the Golden State Warriors. You know that you're able to get to that point. So now it's just time for them to repeat it. It's a lot to ask still, again, from all these young guys. But when you have such a great young core like that, seeing just so much promise in all of them, you have to have expectations on them. And I think that they have those expectations as well. They're looking to go further. And you never know if things can go right for them. A conference finals appearance, a potential finals appearance. I don't see it, but I'm just excited to see this team again, man. This is one of the best teams to watch in the league last year. Just super, super excited to see what they're going to be able to do next. Love this team. Let's see how they're going to be able to fare next season. Now we're going to be moving on to the final team in this podcast episode, and we're going to be talking about the New Orleans Pelicans. And I'm going to go straight right into it before we just go deep, talk about this more in depth. A success for them, making the playoffs. A failure, missing out on the playoffs. Plain and simple. That is what their expectations are, and that's what they should be looking at as a successful season. Even without Zion Williamson last year, they were still able to make the playoffs. They took the Phoenix Suns to 6 games with the roster they had. So you could tell with Willie Green getting the best out of everyone on this roster. You have great star talent there now with Zion coming back from injury. You already have Brandon Ingram. You made the trade for CJ McCollum. The trade for CJ McCollum clearly showed that the Pelicans are done with the rebuild. They're done with trying to get more and more young prospects, even though their team generally is pretty young. They want to make the playoffs. They want to go further. But realistically, especially compared to the rest of the competition in the West, especially knowing that Zion Williamson has come back from an injury which he's missed all of last year and a good chunk of his early career with this similar injury, you just got to make the playoffs again this year. You do not add someone like Zion Williamson, who averaged 28 points per game in his last decently full season, making the All-Star game, and you add him to a team that made the playoffs last year. You don't just add him and be like, you know what, we're regressing. I just don't see it. I don't see it, and I think that should be at least the baseline goal for the New Orleans Pelicans. They're still a young team. That is, again, still a lot to ask when you have to face teams here like the Timberwolves, who've gone better, the Nuggets, Mavericks, Warriors, Grizzlies, Suns, and then still waiting to see how the Clippers and Lakers are going to look this season. That's a really, really deep conference, and I think the Pelicans are in that third tier for sure, especially with great coaching they have on that team as well, which I think is Willie Green is a very, very good coach. They have to have those expectations. You made the move for CJ. You got to at least make the playoffs. You just got to. Zion Williamson is I still believe, could be a generational talent. He needs to show why he was the unanimous number 1 pick. They have to show how he is able to maintain his level of play and stay healthy on the court. There's a lot of things they have expectations for, but their expectations for themselves should be making the playoffs, at the very least. Is there a chance that they can miss it? 100%. There is a 100% chance they can miss it. But with the offensive firepower they have, they shouldn't really be missing it. Their defense, again, still kind of questionable, especially their top 3 players not really having a great defensive background. But when you have players like Herbert Jones, solid defender, Jackson Hayes, Valanciunas, who's a good positional defender, Larry Nance, good help defender. Even off the bench, you have players like Alvarado, who's a very good guard defender. If those guys can pick up the slack, they have decent depth on their team. I think they're going to be able to pull out some wins here. Even getting someone like a Dyson Daniels, who was drafted, I think it was in the lottery as well. If he can turn out to be a little something for you, especially on the defensive end, that'd be great. I'm excited to see this team. Again, another young team, very athletic, just extremely fun to watch, especially with Zion being back. I'm just excited to see how he's going to be able to play this season. I'm excited to see them play. Let's see if they can repeat the success and maybe even go further than they did last year. But yes, those are all the teams I'm covering in this episode. Central Division, Southwest Division. Let me know down below what you guys think. Agree or disagree with what I consider a success or a failure. Was I too harsh? Was I too lenient? Let me know in the comments down below of this or the IG post. But I think this is where we're going to end today's episode. Thank you guys for watching or listening. Remember to show love on all the podcast channels. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell if you're on YouTube. And remember to follow at TV on Basketball on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, along with TikTok for updates on podcasts and for other great content. Next week, we're going to be finishing off all the teams in the NBA with I think it's a Southeast Division and then the Pacific Division next week. So that's going to be something to look out for. So remember, follow me on my socials to be on the lookout for that. And with the NBA season coming up, just expect a lot more content. Daily stuff, we're going to have to wait and see. I'm just going to try and post what I can. Again, busy with school, busy with work and all that. But I'm going to continue to just stick with the podcast. I love doing this every single week. Not as not as much as I've done in previous years, but I'm going to still stick with this. I love creating this, and this really just gets me excited for the NBA season, which I think we're all excited about if you're watching this video or listening to that episode. So just be on the lookout for that. Watch out for all those type of content. And again, thank you guys for all the support for everything these last few years. Really do appreciate you guys, and hopefully we can have another great NBA season. But yeah, this is the end of today's episode. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you have a fantastic day. This is TV signing out. Take it easy, guys. Peace.